Okay, hi everybody. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to talk about QGroundControl for Android. Last month we did customizing QGroundControl, and there was kind of a lot in it, so I didn't really have time to do anything other than the Windows platform. But QGroundControl will work on Windows, work on Linux, and work on Android. And over the years, we have had people say, why can't we get it running on Android? So I wanted to go back and kind of revisit the different steps that you need to do to get it working on Android. And there's actually two parts to this. So the first one is we're going to do it for just like a basic Android device. So that would be a Samsung tablet or a Google Pixel, which is using the latest and greatest of everything. But a lot of people use Herelink to fly, so with QGC. So what I wanted to do is on the second half, I'm going to show how to get it up and running on Herelink. And it also kind of allows me to do two different install types. So the first one we're going to do is just Windows. Going to get Qt Creator, Qt up and running on Windows. And then the second one, which is the Herelink one, I have it running from Windows, WSL, Windows Systems Linux, which is basically Ubuntu. So it's the same as if you wanted to install on Linux. So we capture two parts. So I think it gets a lot of the things together. There are kind of a couple of troubleshooting things, so I can see the reasons why this has failed for different people. So we're going to go through those and point them out as we go through. Okay, so the agenda is a little bit about news. I always do a small bit about news. Where are we with the DJI ban is usually what I talk about, and then we'll do the QGroundControl on Android. And then next month, it's going to be a talk on LLMs and drones. Now, it may be how to get an LLM to fly a drone, or it may be using Qt's new QML trained large language model to allow us to be able to write QML. So QML is, it's pretty obscure language. Not many people know how to do it. So if you can get some extra help from an LLM, so much the better, especially if it's trained on lots of code. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. I have a shout out to somebody who's going to be guest speaker. So if they turn up, that's great. And if they don't, we'll just do the other one about the LLM for developing QML. Okay, so news, commercial UAV was last week. So the big news, the big points that people were talking about was Part 108 was huge. So Part 108 for those not in the US is basically, it's open for comment, but hopefully we can get rid of the beyond visual line of sight. Next year or the year after, there was also a huge PDW factory that's opened, 60,000 square foot, so a drone factory. So that's pretty cool in Huntsville, Alabama, I believe. And then the other thing that's the big news is that we have this looming deadline of December 23rd, which I don't even know is realistic or not, but that's what I'm hearing, which is when the DJI ban is going to go into effect, because there's an audit that's due by that time, and if the audit isn't done, then they're going to be banned. I don't even know what banning means. I don't know if that means you can't buy them, or if they're going to break them all. But I don't even know if it's going to happen December 23rd. So it might be like last year. I was talking about this last year. Next year we might be talking about it too. But December 23rd at the moment is the deadline for when the DJI ban is supposed to come into effect. Okay. So we have two installs that we're going to do. We're going to do the vanilla QGC Android install. So I'm going to do this on Windows. So this is for an Android tablet or a phone. I think I'm showing it here. It's actually running on my Pixel 7. It's very similar to what we did before. So basically last month we walked through how to do VS Code, Qt and Qt Creator, and now we've got this extra bit, which is Android Studio. So we basically need to install these three elements to get everything to work. There's going to be a bit of repetition because last month we did talk about VS Code and Qt Creator, but we're also going to need to install what's known as the NDK, which is the native development kit. So usually when you're talking about Android, you're talking about the SDK, the Android SDK. So the NDK is the C++ libraries. If you want to create a C++ .so file, you use the NDK. And that's what we need for QGC. So I will say as well that if you've never used Qt Creator before, I was talking right at the start of this about how I was worried that I wouldn't get this done in time for the meetup tonight and potentially have to postpone it till tomorrow night, because there's Qt Creator is just really slow when it comes to a lot of this stuff, and it's not just the Android, it's everything. So word of warning, I'm going to give you tips as we go along, but word of warning would definitely be that if you need to get this up and running, don't think that you're going to get it done in an hour or two. You need to dedicate a day to this, just because you're waiting for a lot of the compilation issues that that happen, and indexing that happens with Qt, maybe half a day. Okay, so we have to do our installs. We're going to clone QGC from GitHub, from the Mavlink GitHub repo. We're going to talk about configuring Qt Creator, and I think that's where a lot of people fall down. And then just how do we deploy it? It's pretty simple to deploy it once you get everything working. Okay, and then you don't technically actually need to install Android Studio. What we really need to install are the Android SDK and the Android tools, the platform tools. And potentially you could do that from within Qt Creator, but I'm just going to go and use the Android Studio because I use Android Studio anyway a lot for a lot of our development. Okay, so the install Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition. Why do we do that? Basically, we need the C++ compiler that comes with Visual Studio 2022. We want Qt and the Qt Creator. So the Qt environment and the Qt Creator is basically what we do to run everything. We're going to have a custom installation of the Qt 6.8.3. Make sure that you run the installer as the admin. And then on the Android side, we're using JDK 17, which is quite old now. We're installing Android Studio. And then I have to change this because we don't actually use 25.1, we use 26. Okay, somebody else just wants to get in. Okay, welcome, Joshua. Okay, so we're just going through the install. So, okay, we have download Visual Studio. If you're looking where to find it, it's in the resources from last month. We went over this before. You want to make sure that you're just using the desktop development C++. We don't really care about much. We want the Windows 11 SDK too as well. So all of these need to be checked. Don't need live share and telecode because we're not coding within Visual Studio. Okay, when you download the Windows installer from qt.io, you just click on downloads, get it going. It's going to default to developer tools. You want to make sure that you're using custom installation. Run this at the administrator just to be safe. Okay, and then there was a lot of back and forth trying to figure out exactly what we needed, and even within this, I think I chose a few too many things. So for this version, we're using a relatively new version, so we don't need to show archived, which we've had to do in the past. You want to choose the MSVC, MinGW, Android, because we're doing Android sources. That's kind of optional. And then additional libraries. Under additional libraries, I've checked everything, but technically we only need Qt charts. So this is the first thing that when you download this, you think, okay, this is great, it's going to install in 5 minutes. You know, this is basically go away and go around to Starbucks, get a coffee and come back 20, 30 minutes later. It's going to take a while. So anything that you can do to minimize this is great. So within the additional libraries, just do Qt charts and don't check everything like I did. Okay. Then we have the second part of Qt that we have to do is we need the build tools. So the build tools are MinGW, CMake, and Ninja. One tip here is I was doing this for a while. It was kind of taking me going through Qt. It comes up because I'm doing it in Windows, and like I said, you don't have to do it in Windows, but as if you've been following all my meetups, I always go for the Windows because I think most people will have that, although we will do Linux in the second part of this. But this Ninja is important because if you install Ninja, it means that you won't run into the issue that with Qt with really long names, because if you put it in a 3 or 4 directory deep directory and you do git clone, it's not going to be able to handle the really long names. So you basically have to do Ninja to make sure that you can handle the long names in Windows. Okay. Now, next thing what we're going to do is we're going to get to Android Studio. So you want to install the OpenJDK version 17. The link is in the resources. Install Android Studio. Doesn't really matter what version of Android Studio. If you go to developer.android.com, just get whatever the latest one is. And then you go into, when you open Android Studio, you choose Settings, Tools, SDK Manager. And within the SDK Manager, you'll see SDK Tools. And these are all of the NDK, which is the native development kits, which is basically what you're doing for working with C++. And we have the Microsoft C++ compiler. So obviously on the Android side, we're going to need a C++ compiler too. So we're going to go with 26.1 for the latest version of Qt. You do need to click on Show Package Detail, otherwise you won't see any of these things. Next, what we're going to do is git clone for QGroundControl. So there are two repos with QGroundControl. The main one that I've basically always used is this is the maplink/QGroundControl. But there's also a Herelink one, so we'll talk about that later. So because we're doing the Android one that's going to go on the tablets, we want to go with the latest and greatest. So this is using qt6.x. We're basically going to do a git clone for QGroundControl. If you've never done that before, I have the commands in the Linux side, but also if you go back to last month's, we go into a lot more detail about how you do a git clone. Another tip is Windows users should enable developer mode. That's to ensure that there aren't any linking issues with GStreamer for Android. So when I was doing this for Windows, I was finding it quite difficult to get it to run. Turns out that I was missing GStreamer, which are the video device drivers. And we obviously need them for Android too as well. But the way that the process works is that the Qt is going to go out and get them itself. But because you are running within Windows, it's basically saying this is not a signed package. I'm not going to allow you to download this. So what you need to do is go into System, look for developers, and within developers, there's a whole list of things that you can do, and you want to make sure that the developer mode is turned on so that Qt will be able to go and get the GStreamer and make sure it'll work for Android. Open Qt Creator, and then basically go to Edit Preferences. We're going to do that first. So what we're going to do is set up our Android environment within Qt. We haven't opened any files yet. We've just gone Edit Preferences. We want to make sure that we set the JDK location to point at our JDK 17 directory. And then typically it'll pick up what your SDK is here, but you want to make sure that it's pointing wherever you have installed your Android SDK. What else do we do? If it doesn't work, you have to do setup SDK. You can see here as well, there's an NDK list. I probably need to update this picture because we're playing around with it a lot today. So within these, you can choose whichever one you want. We want 26.1. You would click on that and say make default. You want to make sure that your SDK version is, I use 19. I would recommend using the same. We want to download OpenSSL2 as well. So if you're getting a little red X here, just make sure you click on the download OpenSSL and that will take it down, get it to work for you. Qt is the kind of IDE that you're working with. It will give you lots of pop-ups, lots of warnings. So long as it's not an error, we don't really care. So whatever pop-ups that it gives you, whatever prompts that it gives you to install missing SDK packages, make sure you click OK. And then once you're done, make sure that you click apply when it says Android settings are OK. Okay, so now we have our Qt creator set up. We haven't got the project set up yet, so we want to go and find the project. So you open the project, the one that you've just cloned, you open the CMake lists file, and that basically just starts the QGC project. And then you have to wait. There's another one of those 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how fast your machine is, to make sure that it's indexed all the files and that it's done all the fun things that it wants to do to get itself set up. Another tip here is if you are having huge issues and you're completely losing your minds and you want to go back to the start, once you open this, there will be a file that's created called cmakelist.user. If you delete the cmakelist.user, it removes all the configuration that you've just set up within your project, and you basically get to reconfigure it all over again. So that's a nice tip if you can't figure out actually how to get back to square one within your project. Cool. All right. So the other thing that you want to do is we have lots of different versions of our Android kits, whatever device that you have. So depending on whether it's running x86 or if it's running ARM. And what we want to do is, I'm not really interested in any release to production. All I want to do is get the debug working. So I can show you, I will go in and have a play with the IDE in a second, but basically what you do is you select the Android kits, which will be on the top left-hand side, and then click Configure Project. And then we can start to see what's going on. So we can see whether we're going to do debug, and then this is probably the most important page. We can also navigate to the Projects tab, and this is where the Manage Kits are. So basically what we're doing is we are within our ARM64, which was the top one that we had before. And basically what you want to do is you want to make sure that everything in here is set up correctly. If we scroll down just slightly, you can see here that CMake is probably the thing that's going to cause you the most issues. So you want to make sure that CMake is pointing to the appropriate directory. So make is the compilation tool, and then make was kind of replaced in Qt6 with CMake. So you just want to make sure that it's in there. And then the CMake generated here is Ninja, which means that it's going to be able to handle the long names, which it won't be if you don't have the Ninja installed from Qt. So what else do we have? So it's detected what the different versions are. This is kind of, we're using the desktop, but really you should be, I should have scrolled up and gone for the one that's Android, but that's what we're basically looking for is, what is our compiler that we're using? What is our CMake that we're using? And where is it? And make sure that it doesn't say none. And then the other thing is we want to make sure that we have Ninja installed if you're running on Windows. Typically it detects it automatically, but it's going to miss something because it always does. Okay, so we have the project. It's configured. I would recommend building it first, which you just click on the hammer first. So we're going to click on the hammer, make sure that it's built, make sure that it doesn't have any issues. If within the IDE, it's going to show you pretty quickly where it's got any issues or not. So assuming that everything went okay, what you do then is you connect your Android device via USB. You got to make sure that you've got the developer mode set on your Android phone as well. It's going to give you a pop-up that says, would it allow you to talk to the machine that you're talking to? You say yes. And then what you want to do then is click on the device selector at the bottom left down here. And if the device doesn't say the name of your connected device, what you want to do is click Manage and then select the connected Android device from the drop-down. You'll get a bunch of different devices, which I just show you here, and you just want to make sure that you have chosen the one that you're working with. And then once that's done, basically what we want to do is we just want to click the green arrow to click the play button to run on the Android device. Okay, so this is the Manage Device screen. Okay, so a couple of troubleshooting things. If the kits for the project in Q Creator are showing errors and won't pass the configure project, just like I said, just ensure that the CMake tool is set to the Qt CMake. Ensure the CMake generator is set to Ninja. If all else fails, to reset the kit to the initial settings, close Qt Creator, delete the CMake list.txt.user file in the root of the repository, wherever it was, reopen Qt Creator, and then open the project. It will ask you to select the kits and configure the project again. So let me get out of this real quick. So what do we have here? These are the resources that I typically talk about at the end, but would show you what they are anyway. So this is the documentation for QGroundControl. So getting started with source and build. So this is the git clone command and the update the submodules. It's kind of, I've always found that you run the first one, that usually works without needing the recursive, but this is kind of like to be sure. This is the URL for OpenJDK. You want to make sure that you're scrolling down to 17 to make sure that it doesn't matter which one it is. I always just choose the latest one for 17. This is where if you go to qt.io, if you go download, you can download the installer for Windows. And then later when we do the Herelink, we're going to download the one for Linux and then copy it across to our WSL. This is the repo for QGroundControl, which is, what is the last one? So, you know, it's pretty, there's 4 days ago is the last commit. Like if you subscribe to the issues, you can see that this is really active project and ongoing. There are people using it, people updating it all the time. Lots of effort going on here. One of the most popular open source projects, I would say. And then QPilot, this is the QPilot one, which is Herelink's version of QGroundControl, which we're going to talk about in a second. And you know, there's still people working on it, but the last commits, you know, 10 months ago. Okay, let me open the Qt. Okay, so if we do edit preferences, we talked about that. So here's where our preferences are to make sure that we are pointing at the right JDK location, the right Android SDK location, the right NDK. And then I'm on 17 SDK version, so 17 or 19 will work, and then OpenSSL. Okay, if you want to do manage kits, that's basically allowing you to, the CMake tool should be filled in, and it's Ninja. And then the other thing that we looked at was projects, which is this thing. So typically what you do is you go file, open whatever the project. Somebody's trying to get in late. Okay, so you do QGroundControl, and then if you want to build it, this is where you start. Okay, and then if you want to run it, this is where you start. It's probably going to take a while, so I'm just going to let it run in the background and not worry about it too much. And then this is kind of like replaces what you would have within Android Studio. So typically with an Android Studio, it would connect to whatever device you have. I don't have a device connected at the moment, so I'm not going to be able to connect it. But basically, this is when you connect the device to Android Studio instead of the emulator, it's basically going to go and do it for you. All right, so that's the first half. So let's talk a little bit about Herelink now, because Herelink is a decidedly different animal. Probably one of the most popular remote controllers out there for drones, and we want to be able to install QGC on this. It's significantly different than what we looked at before. So Herelink QGC still uses the earlier version of Qt, so it's 5.x, instead of the latest release from Mavlink, which is on Qt6.x. So it also has its own GitHub repo, which I showed you earlier on. I also use Windows machines, and honestly, I just could not get it to run on Windows Pro. But I thought it would be pretty good to get it to run on Windows Systems Linux, because if you're using a Windows box, then that's great. You don't need to go buy a new one. And if you're using a Linux box, then you can just follow the commands, because WSL is Ubuntu, so it's going to be the same for you. So like I said, we're going to use Windows Systems Linux. If you don't have WS installed, it's really easy to get it working. So basically you do WSL -- install from PowerShell, and it will just start right up after a couple of minutes. So what do we need to install? We need to install the JDK. We need to install Android SDK and NDK. We need to install Make. We're not using CMake because CMake is in 6.x, not 5.x of Qt. And we need to install Qt. We can do all of that from the command line. Plus, we can also run it from Linux, because we can run the Qt maintenance tool, and it will show up as a Windows screen, the same as you would do it. But at the moment, all I'm doing is just doing everything from the command line. We're going to use JDK 11 for this, because we're going back an earlier version of Qt. So always start off with sudo apt update, and then sudo apt install OpenJDK 11. And I'm just going to say yes to make sure everything happens. It will, and then you want to make sure that you set your Java home to wherever the JDK was installed. I have that written down somewhere else later. Okay, so we have the JDK installed. So what's the second thing we need to do? We need to do the Android SDK and NDK. So we could install Android Studio from within WSL, but I'm not. I'm basically just going to do everything from the command line. So we're going to make a directory for command line tools. We're going to do a wget to get the Linux command line tools for Android Studio, and then we are going to set our Android SDK path to wherever it is that we installed our command line tools latest. Okay, and then you can add that to your path, and then obviously the best way to do it is to put in your .bashrc file so that it's going to pick it up the next time that you start WSL. Okay, so what have we done? We got the command line tools, but we need the Android 33 SDK and the build tools. So basically what you do is, because we install the command line tools, and now we have access to SDK Manager. So SDK Manager is the same as going into Android Studio and going Tools SDK Manager. We're just doing it with the command line. So we're installing Android 33, and we're installing the build tools 33.0.2. And then the other thing that we want to do is install our NDK. So in this case, the version of NDK is 21.4. whatever. And we're just installing it to the Android SDK root. So cool. So now we have our JDK, our Android SDK, our NDK. Make is pretty easy to install, and we're going to need to install Qt after that. So make is sudo apt update and sudo apt install make if it's not already installed. So from within your Windows desktop, you want to go to qt.io download, and I showed that page earlier. You want to download the Linux installer, which is going to be a .run file. And then from within WSL, basically the C hard drive on your machine is mounted to //mnt/c, so you can always access anything that's on your Windows laptop from within WSL by just going, copying it from //mnt/c, whatever the /downloads, wherever you put your .run file, and just copy it across. We need to make it executable, so we're going to make it executable, and by chmod +x, we're going to install these different updates, and we're going to install these different libraries that the documentation told us to do. And then we're going to run our installer that we just downloaded from qt.io. In all of these things, I'm using the community edition. If you are going to use this for profit, then you do need to install the commercial edition. But as with all of these things, I'm just doing the freebie community one. Okay, so once we run our sudo qt installer, basically it's going to pop open the qt maintenance tool, the same as it does in Windows. So then we have the same choices. There's a few things that we have to do slightly differently, because it's not going to show you 5.15.2. So what you have to do is say show archive. So it's going to show you all of the versions of Qt, not just Qt 6. And because we're in an earlier version of QGroundControl, we need to be going with 5.15.2. Going to download Android. We're going to download the Qt charts. We also want to make sure that we have CMake, Ninja, and OpenSSL installed, and then uncheck everything else. And then when we're done, you really want to make sure where it tells you that where the installation location is for Qt. But typically, if you're doing it in WSL, it's going to be /opt/QT. Here, what we're doing is we have our build tools, which is CMake, Ninja, and OpenSSL. Kind of thinking I might be able to get away with Ninja, but I guess I just left it in there because I was gun shy after the issues I had on the Windows desktop. Okay, so you do next. It's basically going to install everything. Again, this is, go off to Starbucks and get yourself a coffee and come back in half an hour. And then this is basically where you're going to get this is going to tell you where Qt is installed. So on Windows, on WSL, it's almost certainly going to be /opt/QT. You're going to need it in a few minutes. So make sure that if it's not that you have taken a note of it somewhere. Okay. So we got to do a git clone for our Herelink code. So we're going to download the Herelink version of QGC from github.com/kubepilot. It's going to download whatever the last stable one is. It's not going to download it from master. And then we want to make sure that we're doing our to be sure git submodule update recursive. Okay, now we need to install GStreamer. So these are the video drivers that we need for to make sure that QGC actually works when we fire it up and it doesn't crash. So we do a wget for our GStreamer. We're gonna make a directory for GStreamer. We're gonna unzip everything and then delete whatever the original file was that we downloaded. This is all within the root directory of the repo that you just downloaded. Okay, now we need to set some of the following environment variables. So Java home will be probably within userlib JVM. And then we need to set whatever the Android SDK root. So that's typically, wherever you installed it, it was in my top level directory for WSL. And your NDK root is going to be below the SDK. So it's going to be /SDK/NDK and whatever the version number is of the NDK that you downloaded. Okay, so then we want to build it. So we have to actually create the build Android directory. So make dir build Android CD into that directory, and then /opt/qt, and then we run this qmake command to make sure everything's running, to make sure that everything is compiling, and then make -J4 is the number of parallel jobs to use when building QGC. This is probably, again, going to take 15-20 minutes. If you do run into any issues, if you just delete whatever's in the build directory and run this command again, it will all start pretty quickly. Okay, so we want to power on the Herelink controller connected to our build device, allow connections from this computer on the controller. If the controller is not being picked up, make sure a cable with a data sync has been used, not just a charging cable. Run into that a few times myself. And in the QGC Herelink repo, if you go to the build.android folder, essentially what you do is you want to run this. Actually, no, that's not true. You can't do that. So basically what you want to do is go into the build Android folder, because you won't be able to run this ADB directly from WSL because it doesn't recognize a connected device because you're within a VM within a desktop. However, like I said earlier, anybody who's using WSL has access to the Windows desktop if you just go to the /mnt/c. So what you need to do is within the build Android, you want to get this QGroundControl Herelink.apk file. You want to copy it across to your Windows machine, and then from Windows machine, if you have the Android SDK tools on your path, you should be able to run ADB, which is the Android device bridge, install QGroundControl Herelink.apk, and then everything will work. And you should end up with this version. Now it's obvious even to me that the version of Herelink is a bit older than the current version of QGroundControl, but I think that's what we're stuck with for the moment. I did ask the Philip Raz at the not commercial UAV at Exponential, if there's any plans to update Herelink, and he said not at this time. So I think if you're using Herelink, we're going to be stuck with Qt5 and this install process for a bit longer. Here are some of the resources. So we have the getting started guide, where to download the JDK 17 or JDK 11, JDK 17 actually for the desktop version, the downloads for Qt, the GitHub repo for QGroundControl, the GitHub repo for QPilot for Herelink. And then I'll show you what they are too as well. So it was kind of a bit confusing because I thought we're supposed to be using master, but you're not. This is the one that you use, whatever the latest version is. Stable 4.4.3 is the one that you want to use, and that's the one that works. And then other than that, all I wanted to say is next month what we're going to be doing is using LLMs for drones, and that may take two paths. One is a guest speaker to talk about using ChatGPT to fly drone, probably on the OpenAI side. And then if that doesn't work, what we're going to do is do yet another QGroundControl talk, which would be the third month in a row. That would be for developers who want to learn how to develop QGroundControl, but we're going to use the IntelliJ on steroids that Qt have released a month or two ago, which is basically a fine-tuned LLM on QML code, which you one of the examples I saw was it gave the Qt folks had a Figma screen and it generated the entire project based on a Figma screen, which I thought was amazing. I don't think I would want to use it for that purpose, but certainly if I can use it the same way as I'm using GitHub Copilot to write my QML code, it's going to be a godsend. Okay, and with that, I'll open it to the floor and ask, has anybody got any questions? I don't see anything in the chat either.
That also goes for the YouTube watchers. If you want to ask a question, we'll give you at least 30 seconds.
Yeah, could you put up the slide, Mike?
Which slide?
The slide for signing up to the newsletter.
Sure, but we lose audio. Is that cool?
Yeah, I think that's fine.